Here's a Muslim TikToker firing back at a Christian TikToker who's pointing out scientific and historical mistakes in the Quran. The Muslim's video titled, double exclamation mark, cross emoji, fire emoji. Christian TikToker finds 5, quote, mistakes, end quote, in the Quran. But Muslim debunks it instantly. Scoreboard starts. Let's play.
So in Surah 20, verse 71, the Pharaoh threatens to crucify his court magicians. What's the problem? Crucifixion wouldn't exist for another 14 to 1500 years. But whoever was writing the Quran didn't know that. They made a mistake.
It's you who made the mistake because you're ignorant. When you're thinking about crucifixion, you're thinking about somebody being put on an actual cross. But crucifixion, in the broader sense of the word, includes impalement. That's why Jehovah's Witnesses from the Christian tradition don't believe Jesus was even put on a cross, but rather on a stake. This type of crucifixion did exist in the time of the Pharaoh. Let's verify that. ChatGPT. Did crucifixion exist in the time of the Pharaoh, meaning when people were crucified on a stake?
Yes, there were methods of execution during the time of the pharaohs that involved something similar to being placed on a stake.
Without solid evidence that the Arabic word salaba, to crucify, here means the Roman-style cross-shaped execution, this feels like a weak gotcha. Personally, I think the Quran could have saved everyone a lot of headache by just saying, impale or hang. I mean, even the Bible got a little metal with it. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head and impale your body on a pole, and the birds will eat away your flesh. Brutal, honest, and historically consistent. The Quran meanwhile goes, and the other will be crucified, and the birds will eat from his head. Using a term that today mostly conjures up Roman-style crucifixion is just asking for centuries of confusion, commentaries, and internet debates between people with anime profile pictures. But as far as this being a slam dunk error, this one bounces off the rim.
Second mistake is in the same chapter, verse 95. We see Moses talking to a Samaritan. What's the problem? The Samaritan people group didn't come until hundreds and hundreds of years after Moses, in the 600 to 400 BC range. The author of the Quran didn't know this.
You're that ignorant. Look on the screen behind you. The green screen that you put with the verse, just look at it. It doesn't say a Samaritan from the Samaritan people. It says, Ya Samari. Samari is a person, not a people. Ya Samari. Oh, Samari. Musa alayhi salam is speaking to a man named Samari who misguided the people of Israel, the children of Israel, into worshiping idols while Musa alayhi salam was away. This is an individual named Samari.
So, who's right? Well, technically, neither of them completely nails it. Al-Samari isn't really a personal name. It's more like a title or identifier, kind of like calling someone the Floridian or the guy who ruined everything while Moses was away. In the Quran, the Samari shows up 3 times. The Samari again, and, oh, Samari. The Christian here picked the wrong verse to prove his point, which is kind of like shooting at the wrong basket. That said, the Samaritan problem could be an anachronism, but only if. Assume the Bible's timeline is 100% accurate, good luck with that, and prove that Samiri actually means a literal Samaritan from a nation that didn't exist until centuries later. Prove both of those beyond doubt and you'd have your anachronism nailed, but it's very hard to lock down both. I think the Quranic Samiri seems to reflect elements from Jewish storytelling traditions, particularly midrashic retellings of the Golden Calf episode. One such story, which appears in Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer, chapter 45, written after the Quran in the 8th century CE, features a magical headband engraved with the divine name that brings the calf to life, even mooing. Rabbi Yehuda even says Samael, a demonic figure, entered into the calf to mislead Israel. While the Quran may have not copied this exact text, it's likely that both drew from earlier oral or folkloric versions of this story circulating in Jewish communities. These legends would have been known in Arabia and beyond. Could Samael have morphed linguistically into Samiri? Maybe, especially if the figure was associated with corruption, sorcery, or betrayal. And if storytellers were blending characters like Aaron, Jeroboam, and calf worship imagery, with some anti-Samaritan flavor thrown in, it's easy to see how a villainous Samiri could emerge as a sort of fanfic remix. So, did the Quran make a historical error? Not exactly, because it's not giving history at all. More like weird fanfic based on older fanfic, something both the Bible and the Quran seem to specialize in. For me, the bigger issue is that neither the Bible nor the Quran matches the archaeological record. The Exodus story itself has no solid historical support. Score: Muslim 2, for successfully dodging a bad faith take. Christian 0, for aiming at the wrong timeline entirely.
The third mistake we see here is in 86:6, where the author of the Quran thinks that the fluid to make a child comes between the backbone and the ribcage.
Once again, you had the tools available to know that you're wrong. How? Look at the little number 1 next to the verse behind you, and if you had actually clicked on it, you would have read, it clearly says there, that the testicles and the ovaries are formed in the abdomen of the fetus during the first weeks of pregnancy, before descending to the permanent place in the pelvis. Both are sustained by arteries originating between the backbone and the ribcage. It's right there. You could have just clicked that little number 1.
First off, a man's fluid, the baby-making kind, doesn't come from the backbone or the ribs. It comes from the testicles, prostate, seminal vesicles, and bulbourethral glands. You know, actual organs located way south of the ribcage. 2. A woman's fluid? If we're talking egg production, that's the ovaries. If we're talking sexual fluids, well, those don't fertilize anything. They're just there for the fun part. None of this magic comes from between your spinal column and your ribcage, unless you're doing reproduction all wrong. Now let's talk about this attempted scientific save.
Testicles and the ovaries are formed in the abdomen of the fetus during the first weeks of pregnancy, before descending to the permanent place in the pelvis. Both are sustained by arteries originating between the backbone and the ribcage.
Right. So the Quran is supposedly describing sperm production by referencing where the testicles were chilling when you were a fetus. That's like saying pizza is made in the hospital because that's where chefs were born. Even worse, at that early fetal stage, there's no sperm, no fluid, and no gushing. Just some primitive cell blobs waiting to turn into gonads and make you awkward in middle school. And earlier, when you wanted to prove your point about crucifixion, you confidently turned to your digital sidekick.
Let's verify that. ChatGPT. Did crucifixion...
So, why not do the same thing now? Go ahead, ask ChatGPT. Google it, crack open a medical textbook, watch a documentary, phone a friend, ask a Muslim urologist at your local mosque. Just say, where does the fluid that makes a baby come from? Yeah, nowhere in the answer will you hear the words backbone or ribcage, not even as a joke. The real reason the Quran phrases it that way is simple. It's echoing ancient expressions like, children come from the backs of their fathers, common across pre-Islamic Arabia and other early cultures.
Fourth and fifth mistakes are actually in the same story. One is the story itself, which I'll get to, but within the story, chapter 18, verse 86, the Quran says that the sun sets in a spring of murky water. That is a mistake.
Maybe this gentleman is unable to read, but right behind you, the Quran does not say the sun sets in murky water. The verse is on your green screen behind you. It says that Dhul Qarnayn reached a point where the sun appeared, read it right behind you, to be setting in the spring of murky water. This is a place where the sunset hits the horizon, appeared to him.
The word appeared doesn't exist in Arabic. That's the translator inserting their own spin. The verse literally says, until he reached the setting point of the sun, he found it setting in a spring of murky water, where he found some people. Now yes, found it could mean it seemed that way to him. Okay, but the problem is, the Quran isn't quoting Zulkarnain. It's God telling the story. Why is God, who knows the actual structure of the cosmos, describing visual hallucinations as if they're real locations, without correcting them? He reached the setting point of the sun. So what do you expect to see there if the earth is flat? The sun. And he found it setting in a spring of murky water. What is the purpose and wisdom of conveying what Dhul Qarnayn imagined on the tongue of God, as though it were true, while in reality it was incorrect, without correcting it? Then it gets better. Dhul Qarnayn continues his road trip, this time to the opposite end, until he reached the rising point of the sun. He found it rising on a people for whom we had provided no shelter from it. What are we even talking about here? A civilization allergic to shade? A sun-worshipping nudist colony? What's the grand purpose and divine wisdom behind pointing out there's a group of people with zero shelter from the sun? Besides the obvious, that the Quran's author really thought they'd reached the literal edge of the world, where all that's left is a blazing sun with nothing to block it. And then comes the official footnote, which is chef's kiss apologetics. They either had no clothes or homes to protect them from the sun. So you're telling me God paused eternal wisdom transmission to describe a group of half-naked people standing around in the middle of nowhere, just getting roasted alive, because they somehow never discovered clothes, roofs, umbrellas, or basic survival skills? But the real kicker here is consistency. If there's a place where the sun rises and a place where it sets, and you're describing them both as physical locations you can travel to, what does that sound like to you? Not heliocentrism, not orbital mechanics. It sounds like someone describing the sun like it's a giant flaming coin dipping into a muddy pool at the edge of a flat Earth. And that fits the historical worldview of the time. People did think the Earth had edges. Even early Muslim scholars weren't buying the whole spherical Earth thing, like Ibn Atiyad, and the apparent meaning of this verse is that the Earth is flat, not spherical, and this is what the scholars have held. The claim of its being spherical, while not diminishing any of the religious tenets, is a view that is not supported by the scholars of the faith. Where did they get that idea from, I wonder? But let's not forget, the Bible is also in love with the phrase, "From the rising of the sun to the place where it sets, the name of the Lord is to be praised," followed by multiple verses that clearly suggest the authors believed the earth is flat. We will have to remove the point.
The story itself in Surah 18 is actually about Alexander the Great. He's called the Dul Qarnayn, or the two-horned one. As you can see in this depiction of him, you can see one of his horns. There would have been one on each side of his head. So the story in Surah 18 actually copies this 6th to 7th century Syriac Christian apocalyptic work about Alexander the Great.
Okay, so first off, just because you found a coin with Alexander the Great with having a horn on the side of his head doesn't mean that that's what the Quran is saying. The Quran nowhere, nor in any hadith of the Prophet, peace be upon him, ever say that Dhul Qarnayn is Alexander the Great.
Just because you found a coin of Alexander with 2 horns doesn't mean the Quran is talking about him. Neither the Quran nor any hadith says Dhul Qarnayn was Alexander the Great. Yes, Alexander was depicted with horns. So was Cyrus the Great. So were various gods and kings. Historically, we can't definitively pin Dhul Qarnayn to Alexander, Cyrus, or anyone else. The Quranic version borrows motifs from Alexander legends, but reshapes them into an Islamic moral narrative. It's less a biography and more a reworked legend, the kind that moved easily through oral and literary traditions to teach spiritual and ethical lessons. Islam gets a point here. Why? Because claiming Alexander just because of horn cosplay is weak sauce.
But when we look at your book, the Bible, look at the verses right here. Was Ahaziah 22 or 42? Was Jehoiachin 8 or 18? Was the father of Joseph Heli or Jacob? Did Judas hang himself, or did he fall headlong and burst open in the middle? There are contradictions, clear mistakes all over the Bible, and you know that.
The Christian didn't bring up a single contradiction in the Quran, so why is the Muslim suddenly bringing up Bible contradictions? If you're going to counter, at least make it relevant. Bring up historical or scientific issues in the Bible that actually parallel the type of claim the Christian made. Otherwise, it just looks like you're dodging. And since this one's off topic and doesn't address the original point, I have to hand the point to the Christian here. Scores at 2-3. And that's a wrap for this video. Hopefully you laughed, cringed, learned something new, like where sperm actually comes from. Bye, and may your holy book arguments stay mildly entertaining and low on death threats.